Welcome back. June 17th, 2021. 58 years ago today, the United States Supreme Court took religion out of our schools and banning the Lord's Prayer from being recited in our public schools. That case came out of Pennsylvania. It had one dissent, Potter Stewart, who wrote, among other things, quote, "For a compulsory state educational system so structures a child's life that if religious exercises are held to be an impermissible activity in schools, religion is placed at an artificial and state-created disadvantage, and a refusal to permit religious exercises thus is seen not as the realization of state neutrality, but rather as the establishment of a religion of secularism, or at least as government support of the beliefs of those who think that religious exercises should be conducted only in private." Subtle point. If religion is the one thing not allowed in schools, or among a few things not allowed or disfavored in schools, it is put on a lower scale and in a disadvantage, an artificial station that is neither favoring or disfavoring. It is disfavoring. It is not neutral. It is biased. This morning, another Supreme Court case came down out of Pennsylvania, allowing Catholic services to continue to engage the city of Philadelphia, contract with them, though it will not place foster children in same-sex couples' homes. A city decision barred such contracting with Catholic social services based on Philadelphia's non-discrimination statutes. Interestingly, you might think such a decision would come down to us 5-4. Guess what? It was unanimous. In Catholic services, the First Amendment won. The interest in non-discrimination, John Roberts wrote for the court, does not overcome the Catholic religion's or services' interest in their religious exercise. The city's foster system allowed for other exceptions to contract with the city, and given such exceptions to the non-discrimination laws, religion and religious belief could not be punished under the guise that non-discrimination is the most or absolute or one inviolable concern of interest. There were exceptions for other things, including religion. Non-discrimination was not inviolable. If exceptions can exist for others, they cannot not exist. In other words, they must exist for the religious. In a way, this is a massive corrective to that which took place exactly 58 years ago today, and I believe it will be a watershed holding, or has the potential to be. Of course, this case comes to us just as there is a big debate in Democratic Party circles as to whether Justice Breyer should retire with all deliberate speed, as it were, so the Democrats can replace him with a younger Democratic Party favorite at the Supreme Court for a lifetime appointment. Today's decision would normally envenom such debates with fundraising and political energy, akin to something like Chuck Schumer leading rallies against the Supreme Court for having unleashed a whirlwind. But even Stephen Breyer today sided with the majority, the unanimity in today's holding. This is a good day, not necessarily for the right, but for the right of religion and religious practice. But more importantly, it is the first day in a long time a brick has been taken out of the wall of insanity that has governed most anti-discrimination legislation and law. I'm not saying, don't get me wrong, anti-discrimination laws are insane. Far from it. I support most of them. I'm saying they are not absolute in relation to other interests that can appear discriminatory even though they are not, namely traditional religious faith, practice, doctrine, and adherence. I was thinking of the impact and import of this morning as I think of the times we live in and the classical institution usually poised up against, I should say counterpoised, right up against religion. What is the thing that we worship if not religion or God? Science. Science is usually counterpoised against religion. To be crude, I could quote Jon Stewart and say, after all is said and done, we have a pandemic caused by science, or at least scientists. Or I could quote another famous liberal, Thomas Frank, who wrote, quote, "But these days the consensus doesn't consense quite well as it used to. Now the media is filled with disturbing stories suggesting that COVID might have come not from populism after all, but from a laboratory screw-up in Wuhan, China. You can feel the moral convulsions beginning as the question sets in. What if science itself is some way responsible for all this? The answer is that this is the kind of thing that could obliterate the faith of millions. The last global disaster, the financial crisis of 2008, smashed people's trust in the institutions of capitalism, in the myths of free trade, in the new economy, and eventually the elites who ran both American political parties. In the years since, liberal leaders have labored to remake themselves into defenders of professional rectitude and established legitimacy in nearly every field. In reaction to who they thought was so foolish, Donald Trump, liberalism made a sort of cult of science, an expertise, the university system, executive branch norms, the intelligence community, the State Department, NGOs, the legacy news media, and the hierarchy of the credentialed achievement in general was the new church, the new theology of the day. Now here we are in the waning days of disastrous global crisis number 2. COVID is, of course, worse by many orders of magnitude than the mortgage meltdown. It has killed millions and ruined lives and disrupted the world economy far more extensively. Should it turn out that scientists and experts and NGOs, etc., are villains rather than heroes of this story, we may very well see the expert-worshipping values of modern liberalism going up in a fireball of public anger. Let us pray for science, intoned a New York Times columnist back at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. The title of his article laid down the foundational faith of Trump-era liberalism. Coronavirus is what you get when you ignore science. 10 months later, at the end of a scary article about the history of gain-of-function research and its possible role in the still ongoing COVID pandemic, Nicholas Baker wrote as follows, quote, "This may be the greatest scientific meta-experiment of the 21st century. Could a world full of scientists do all kinds of reckless, recombinant things with viral diseases for many years and successfully avoid a serious outbreak? The hypothesis was that, yes, it was doable. The risk was worth taking. There would be no pandemic, except there was. If it does indeed to turn out that the lab leak hypothesis is the right explanation for how it began, that the common people of the world have been forced into a real-life lab experiment at tremendous cost, there is a moral earthquake on the way. Let us pray now for science indeed." That about says it all. But this is what you get when you give value-free social science and do so in a sneering or negative way toward belief, faith, and religion. The value-free social science has now also invaded physical science in a way it was never meant to. One might have said physical science is amoral, and that would be fair enough. What is so controversial about photosynthesis, after all? It just is. And amoral was just fine, like photosynthesis, for a while, because amorality still demanded a kind of morality, an ancillary or auxiliary morality, if you will. Amoral systems know or used to know their limits and their need to rely on other investigations and inquiries to find out whether they should, just as much as whether they could, if I may invoke Dr. Ian Malcolm. But that changed too. By eliminating religion or religious guidance or other forms and formats of morality from the public and intellectual and respectable spheres, we slid from amoral science to immoral science. It did not begin in the eugenics movement in America. It was here long before that, and by here I mean amongst humans. We just thought we had a handle on it. As John Adams wrote, quote, "The science of government is my duty to study more than all other sciences. The arts of legislation and administration and negotiation ought to take the place of, indeed exclude in a manner all other arts. I must study politics and war, that our sons may have liberty to study mathematics and philosophy. Our sons ought to study mathematics and philosophy, geography, natural history, and naval architecture, and navigation, and commerce, and agriculture, in order to give their children a right to study painting, poetry, music, architecture, statuary, tapestry, and porcelain. The ordo amorum here is crucial. One can study things like the physical sciences once one has established the realms and environments in which it can and should be studied, based on what? A common morality based on generally respected philosophy. In other words, notions of right and wrong are the terrain upon which, and the only terrain upon which, subsidiary explorations into things like science, which are by nature amoral, can take place only on the field and the ground of a greater moral series of constraints. This explains, of course, the great point Hugh Hallman has made about the great scientific admiration and respect that existed for Dr. Joseph Mengele before the 1930s for about 3 decades. And it explains one of my favorite quotes from a letter a teacher wrote to the child psychiatrist Haim Genote. Quote, "I am a survivor of a concentration camp. My eyes saw what no person should witness. Gas chambers built by learned engineers, children poisoned by educated physicians, infants killed by trained nurses, women and babies shot by high school and college graduates. So understand that I am suspicious of education. My request is this: help your children become human. Your efforts must never produce learned monsters, skilled psychopaths, or educated Eichmanns. Reading, writing, and arithmetic are important only if they serve to make our children more human. Make your children more human." Pretty good directive, that, especially in an age of doing our best to sexualize and dehumanize them, de-childhood them. Again, turning children into things they are not, like robots or automatons, used to be something the left cared about. Today, it is something they have perfected. Again, this is what you get with value-free social and physical science. Well, thankfully, the Supreme Court today took a little indirect brick out of that wall that the elites have been foisting on us, that religion and morality are baleful and backward, when it turns out perhaps it is their opposites, as the past year and a half illustrates when it comes to the sacrosanctity of science, that are the baleful and backward institutions, played by knaves to make a trap for fools. I'm Seth Leafs, and we'll be right back.